what that car looked like when you hopped in and drove it and how it drove.
The black V8 Interceptor. It's the undisputed fire-breathing star of the wasteland, a symbol of raw power and the ultimate survival machine. But what if I told you the car you know is a cinematic illusion? The legend of the Pursuit Special is built on a foundation of bizarre compromises, fortunate accidents, and clever, low-budget deceptions. From its most iconic features to its very survival off-screen, the Interceptor's real history is far stranger than any post-apocalyptic fiction. This is not merely a car, it's a cultural artifact, a testament to creativity under constraint, and a provocative example of how legend can outshine reality. MFP's million-dollar mistake. The Pursuit Special was not an improvisation by a desperate cop. It was an intentional, high-budget retention tool. The car known on screen as Max's V8 Interceptor began life as a 1973 Ford XB Falcon GT 351, commissioned by the Main Force Patrol's top brass, specifically to keep their best pursuit officer from walking away. Commander Fifi McAfee and Police Commissioner Labatouche authorized the build, despite the force already operating under financial strain, demonstrating how far the institution was willing to bend its priorities for one man. Their mechanic, Barry, executed the build with visible and intimidating performance modifications, including the port exhaust pipes and the prominently mounted blower unit. The car was meant to embody state-sanctioned authority and to function as the ultimate symbol of order on wheels, engineered as a benefit to loyalty rather than as a standard enforcement asset. The twist is that the investment never served the agency's interests. Once Max's family was killed, he simply took the car for himself. A machine purpose-built to retain institutional control instead became the instrument of personal, unsanctioned vengeance. In narrative terms, the Interceptor became a turned asset, a government prestige project that instantly crossed the line into rogue warfare the moment Max drove it out of the MFP's garage. The Great Supercharger Fraud. The Interceptor's defining visual cue is unquestionably that massive Wayan 6, 71 supercharger punching straight through the hood. It's the car's mechanical heart, broadcasting raw, unhinged power to anyone who sees it. Except, in the original Mad Max film, it was entirely for show. The most famous engine component in movie history was a non-functional prop, bolted on purely for intimidation. This cinematic fraud becomes obvious when Max dramatically flips a switch on the gear stick to engage the blower for a burst of speed. From a mechanical standpoint, this is pure fantasy. A real supercharger of that type is directly belt-driven by the engine's crankshaft. It is always on, always forcing air into the motor. It cannot be simply clicked on and off at will. The filmmakers installed the blower housing, but it wasn't hooked up to do anything. This decision reveals a brilliant prioritization of visual storytelling over mechanical accuracy. The production team knew the sight of that polished behemoth, combined with the dramatic on switch, would communicate ultimate power to the audience more effectively than any spec sheet. It was a visual threat, a piece of psychological warfare bolted directly to the bonnet. This fabrication created one of the most iconic and replicated tropes in automotive cinema, proving that, for the Interceptor, the look of unbridled power was far more important than the reality of it. The Interceptor's fake death. For its appearance in Mad Max 2, the Interceptor was no longer the MFP's pristine weapon. It was a hardened wasteland survivor. This required a full post-apocalyptic makeover. The high-gloss paint was replaced with a dull matte black, which was then scrubbed and weathered to look rusty and abused. The front air dam was removed, likely for better off-road clearance, and the side pipes and rear wheels were changed. Most dramatically, those two massive cylindrical fuel tanks were installed in the back. This wasn't a simple prop. The modification was so extreme, it required the crew to permanently remove the car's trunk lid and back window. The script for this sequel, however, demanded the car's ultimate sacrifice. The story required the Interceptor to be violently and definitively destroyed in a spectacular rollover crash and explosion. This scene provides a brutal, emotional gut punch, as Max's last tie to his old life is erased. But the car that tumbles down that embankment isn't the one audiences had followed for 2 films. The production team had cobbled together an entirely separate duplicate car. built for the sole purpose of being destroyed in that one stunt. While the Pursuit Special died a fiery death on screen, the original hero vehicle was kept safely intact, allowing the filmmakers to have their explosive climax without sacrificing the true automotive star. A movie car nobody bought. Once filming on the first movie ended, the production team converted the Pursuit Special back into a compliant street car and put it up for sale. The film had already made the machine recognizable, yet not a single buyer came forward. With no market response and no use for it, the car remained idle until the sequel received its go-ahead. Its return to the screen was not the result of preservation planning, but of simple commercial failure. When Mad Max 2 entered production, the same unsold Falcon was repurposed rather than replaced. It was stripped, weathered, and re-engineered to fit the scorched landscape of the second film. The familiar trunk and spoiler were removed to install twin external fuel tanks, turning the rear half of the car into a rolling reservoir built for distance rather than speed. A new gauge was fitted to reflect its expanded capacity, and the entire body was cosmetically degraded, so it would register on camera as a worn survival chassis rather than a glossy police asset. The Interceptor's second life on film and its transformation into a cultural artifact hinged on the fact that no one wanted it when the crew tried to sell it. The absence of a buyer inadvertently preserved one of cinema's most recognizable machines. Ford's factory-built intimidation. The Interceptor's menacing presence wasn't just the result of the MFP's modifications. The car was born looking for a fight. The 1973 XB Falcon was the product of a deliberate design choice by Ford Australia. While the cosmetic changes from its predecessor, the XA, were relatively minor, their specific goal was to give the new model a more muscular stance. This wasn't an accident. The designers intentionally sculpted the car's lines to project a more aggressive and dominant image on the road, creating the perfect, intimidating canvas that the filmmakers would later transform into a post-apocalyptic icon. Beyond its tough new look, the XB was also a significant technical leap for the Falcon line. It was the first time front disc brakes were offered as standard equipment across all models, from the base sedan to the top-tier GT. This meant that every XB, in theory, had the stopping power to back up its aggressive appearance. It also introduced new comfort options like available carpeted interiors, showing Ford's attempt to blend performance with refinement. This context is crucial. The film's production team didn't just pick any car. They chose the top-of-the-line Falcon GT hardtop, the apex predator of a model range that already included wagons, vans, and utility vehicles, and which was specifically engineered by Ford to look mean right out of the box. Eric Bana's other co-star. The Interceptor's cinematic legacy doesn't just end with the Wasteland. The base car, the Falcon XB GT hardtop, is such an Australian icon that it became the star of its own, completely separate film. Actor Eric Bana's 2009 documentary, Love the Beast. This wasn't just a celebrity profile on a cool car, it was a deeply personal story. The film meticulously documents Bana's own quarter-century history with his personal XB Falcon, a car he has owned since he was just 15 years old. This documentary shifts the car's identity from a fictional post-apocalyptic weapon to a real-world cultural touchstone. It perfectly illustrates the profound, almost obsessive connection that many Australians have with this specific model. The film treats the car as a character, a symbol of youth, passion, and a lifelong commitment. While Mad Max made the XB Falcon famous internationally as a symbol of societal collapse, Bana's documentary celebrates it for what it truly represents in its home country. The absolute pinnacle of Australian muscle car heritage, and an object of enduring, personal devotion. It proves the car is a legend with or without the blower. A name for every apocalypse. The Interceptor's identity is so complex that it requires multiple names to chart its violent life cycle. These names aren't interchangeable. They are distinct titles that mark the chapters of its story. When it was built by the MFP, it was the Pursuit Special, its official designation as a high-cost, state-of-the-art piece of government hardware. But after Max steals it, it sheds that institutional title and becomes the V8 Interceptor, a more personal, mythic name for a lone survivor's tool. This is the car, based on the 1973 Ford Falcon XB GT Coupe that bridges the gap between the old world at the end of Mad Max and the full-blown wasteland in Mad Max 2. Most cars are lucky to be a prop in one film. The Interceptor, however, is a true franchise protagonist. It makes a dramatic return decades later in Mad Max Fury Road, only to be captured, ritualistically stripped to bare metal, and completely reborn by the War Boys. This new, brutal off-road form, a silver, skeletal, supercharged monster, is given a final, ominous title by its new masters, the Razor Cola. The car's linguistic journey from Pursuit Special to Razor Cola isn't just a trivia note. It's a perfect, brutal summary of the Mad Max world's entire descent from fragile order into pure, mechanized chaos. From white to black menace. The Interceptor is famous for its black-on-black paint scheme, the perfect stealthy uniform for a vengeful nomadic warrior. But the car began its life as the complete opposite. The actual vehicle, a November 1973 Ford Falcon XB GT hardtop, was originally painted polar white. It wasn't a special order, it was a standard customer car delivered to a rural dealership in New South Wales, optioned with a black vinyl interior and a two-tone white and black bonnet. This contrast from white to black is jarring enough, but the car's true pedigree is what's astonishing. This wasn't just any Falcon GT. By cross-referencing its VIN, historians confirmed it was one of the last 86 XB GT hardtops built by Ford Australia to receive the highly sought-after, imported big port US 351 Cleveland 4V engine, paired with a top-loader manual transmission. This was the pinnacle of Australian muscle. Furthermore, of those 86 legendary cars, only 6 were painted polar white. The production team didn't just grab a common Falcon, they took an exceptionally rare, limited production collector's item and permanently transformed it into the apocalyptic icon we know today. The Evil Design Directive. The Interceptor's iconic look wasn't born from detailed schematics or a boardroom committee. It was the result of an almost laughably simple, purely abstract brief. After the White Falcon was acquired, art director John Dowding handed the project to a Melbourne-based vehicle enhancement company, GraphX International. The general manager Ray Beckerly, along with his team including Alan Hempel, John Evans, and painter Rod Smythe, were given their marching orders. Beckerly later recalled the full extent of the instructions. Dowding said the black car had to look evil. It had to look different from anything on the road, and its paint finish must incorporate both gloss black and matte black. And that, according to Beckerly, was about the extent of the brief. Think about that. There were no blueprints for the famous Concorde nose cone, no detailed sketches for the roof and trunk spoilers, no official plans for the flared wheel arches. The entire identity of the Pursuit Special was left to the creative interpretation of this local custom shop. They were tasked with translating the feeling of evil into fiberglass, steel, and paint. This explains the car's unique, almost haphazardly aggressive aesthetic. The black-on-black paint scheme, with its contrasting textures, was the only concrete starting point. Everything else was an improvised solution to a one-word problem, which is precisely why the final car feels so raw and unlike any sanitized Hollywood creation. The Superbird's secret cousin. The Interceptor's most aggressive feature, that menacing, shark-like Concorde nose cone, was never designed for a police car. It wasn't even an original concept for the movie. It was a commercially available part with a deep and rebellious history in Australian high-performance design. The concept was originally developed by designer Peter Arcady-Payne, who wanted to create an aerodynamic, high-speed nose for the Falcon GT Coupe. His direct inspiration came from the world of NASCAR, specifically the legendary long-nose Plymouth Superbird. However, when Arcady-Payne pitched his idea, Ford management refused to authorize the creation of a Concorde front end for a GT. Undeterred, Arcady-Payne secretly built his concept anyway, but to get it past the executives, he installed it on the most unassuming vehicle he could, a panel van. This custom van, also influenced by the HPF Forenza, was displayed at the 1977 Melbourne Motor Show, where its radical design got a massively positive response. The front end was then marketed commercially as the Concorde style. It was this part, a rejected racing design with a secret life on a van that film customizer Ray Beckerly spotted. He contacted Arcadipane directly and had that exact treatment fitted to the Falcon, giving the Interceptor a face that was born from pure racing ambition. Hybrid parts built the beast. The Interceptor's menacing silhouette was crafted from an unexpected combination of parts, blending components from multiple Australian vehicles. While the fiberglass nose was expertly fitted in Peter Arcadipane's workshop, the roof and rear spoilers came from an entirely different source. These striking additions were produced by Errol Platt at Purvis Fiberglass Products and were actually adapted from the molds used for Bob Jane's HQ Monaro sports sedan. Fitting them to the Falcon required minimal effort, just a little grinding, some Sikaflex, and body filler. Ray Beckerly, one of the customizers, decided to add the roof spoiler after evaluating the car's side profile, prioritizing visual impact over aerodynamic function. Even the wheel arches were hybridized. Cut down Holden. A 9X flares were integrated under the bodywork and molded in by painter Rod Smythe and his brother. While these modifications gave the Interceptor a uniquely aggressive and muscular appearance, most of the elements were functionally ornamental rather than performance-enhancing. The car's aesthetic relied on clever engineering and cross-brand creativity, turning a standard Falcon into a cinematic powerhouse. This inventive approach demonstrates how the Interceptor became more than just a Ford Falcon. It was a Frankenstein creation of Australian muscle car culture. By mixing Ford and Holden parts and emphasizing visual drama over strict functionality, the filmmakers achieved a vehicle that felt alive with menace. Skeptical builders, self-funded fuel. The GraphX team spent 3 months transforming the Falcon into the Interceptor, and the entire time, they were convinced the film was going to be a disaster. The Mad Max production was running on fumes, and when it came time to pay the bill, the film's creators were so low on cash, they offered the builders an alternative, a percentage of the movie's future profits. In what is now a legendary financial blunder, the GraphX team flatly declined the royalties. They were so openly skeptical of the project and did not think it would be a success that they assumed the offer was worthless. The production's poverty was no exaggeration. When the crew arrived to pick up the finished car, they were so broke that the GraphX staff had to put fuel in the car themselves, just so the film crew could drive it off the property. Despite the lack of pay, the builders enjoyed the project, as they specialized in different-looking designs with no money in them. As a perfect symbol of this disconnect, manager Ray Beckerly later recalled using the finished, menacing Pursuit Special for mundane family errands, including driving his 3 daughters to their netball games. Interceptor used as payment. When Mad Max wrapped production in 1978, the film's producers were completely broke. They couldn't pay all their bills, so the Interceptor, the star of the movie, was used as barter. The car was given to the film's mechanic, Murray Smith, as a direct settlement for his unpaid wages. Smith suddenly owned the Pursuit Special, but he quickly learned the difference between a movie prop and a daily driver. The car was so thirsty it cost him a significant amount in petrol just to commute to work and back. This impracticality led Smith to put the car up for sale. He set the asking price at a mere $7,500. But in a stunning display of the car's initial lack of appeal, there were no takers. Nobody wanted to buy it. To make the car street legal and more practical to drive, Smith had to defang the beast. He personally removed the iconic, non-functional supercharger and the aggressive side exhaust pipes. He left the Concorde front end, but noted it broke a couple of times because it was mounted too low. The car was then used as a promotional tool, touring Melbourne shopping centers. It was only after the film became a massive, unexpected success that the producers, now planning a sequel, had to buy back the very car they had given away as a paycheck. Interceptor avoids final fate. After the completion of Mad Max 2 and the destruction of the stunt double, the remaining original Interceptor faced an uncertain future. Despite surviving 2 films, the car was considered surplus and was slated for scrapping. The production team had no further use for the hero vehicle, and its destruction seemed inevitable. Fortunately, the person responsible for disposing of the car felt a deep reluctance to destroy such an important cinematic artifact. This hesitation ultimately spared the Interceptor from being melted down. Instead of meeting its end, the car was placed on the market for sale once again. For the second time in its life, the iconic vehicle failed to attract a buyer. It was then transferred to a colleague named Ray Evans, who operated a scrap yard in Adelaide. There, the Interceptor sat exposed outdoors for over 3 years, weathering the elements and sustaining minor wear. Despite its battered condition, it attracted attention from locals and fans of the film series, becoming an object of fascination in the community. The car's fortunes finally changed when Bob Fursenko, a devoted fan of the Mad Max films, spotted the Interceptor. Recognizing its significance, he negotiated its purchase and became the car's new owner. Fursenko noted that, although the front end bore damage from the films, the car was generally in sound condition. Hidden Mark Seal's authenticity. After Bob Fursenko rescued the Interceptor from its scrapyard exile, he faced 2 monumental tasks: a full restoration and, more importantly, proving its identity. He entrusted the car to Franklin Side Crash Restorers, where Tony and Mario Romero began an extensive months-long rebuild that cost $25,000 AUD. This was an enormous financial gamble on a car that was, at that point, just a battered shell with a good story. Fursenko made the crucial creative decision not to restore the car to its pristine Mad Max 1 appearance. Instead, he chose to retain the massive, crude external fuel tanks, cementing the car's more famous Mad Max 2 wasteland identity. To prove its pedigree, Fursenko became a detective. He tracked down key figures from its past, including the scrapyard owner Ray Evans, and, critically, the original film mechanic Murray Smith. They provided vital photos from the Kennedy Miller studios that matched the registration number, building a strong case. But the definitive, irrefutable proof was far more personal and hidden. When the restorers began their work, they pulled off an interior door trim panel. Scratched into the metal surface behind it, they found Murray Smith's own initials. This small, almost invisible mark, a mechanic's simple "I was here," became the car's hidden signature, the undeniable forensic evidence that this was the one true battle-scarred Interceptor. Speed was the armor. The Interceptor's menacing appearance, with its aggressive spoilers and black paint, gives it the visual weight of an armored assault vehicle. But this is a complete illusion. The main Force Patrol's official design philosophy for its pursuit specials was speed, not steel. The car was built with absolutely no armor or protective plating of any kind. It was, in reality, a high-speed, fragile weapon. The MFP's entire strategy rested on the driver, not the car. These vehicles were reserved exclusively for the top 10% of graduates, the absolute best drivers the Force could produce. These elite operators were expected to rely on sheer performance and their own reflexes to overcome danger, not on brute force or a reinforced chassis. This focus on performance was obsessive. The cars were fitted with aerodynamic panels, and any component that created wind drag was completely removed. This included obvious things like exterior lights and sirens, but it also extended to the extreme removal of the left-hand mirror. The Interceptor wasn't built to survive a fight. It was built to be so fast that no fight could ever catch it. Nostalgic racing fuel hat. We know the supercharger itself was a non-functional prop in the first film, but the components bolted to it were surprisingly authentic. The fuel injection system sitting right on top of that blower wasn't just a random box fabricated by the prop department. It was a specific, genuine piece of racing hardware known as a Scott injector hat, also called a Scott super slot. This is the rectangular unit positioned directly beneath the main scoop, held onto the supercharger with 6 bolts. This component was a real piece of 1960s drag racing technology. Its design was for pure, raw competition, and it had one defining, highly impractical feature. It was built with absolutely no provision for an air filter. In a racing environment where engines are torn down and rebuilt constantly, this wasn't an issue. On any street-driven motor, however, it would guarantee a catastrophically short lifespan by allowing the engine to ingest road grit and debris. This choice reveals a fascinating layer of the car's design. The filmmakers, while building their fake performance part, went to the trouble of sourcing a real, rare, and period-correct racing component just to make the prop look credible. Its total unsuitability for the real world, let alone a dusty wasteland, makes it the perfect, ironic symbol for a movie car that is all about visual intimidation over practical logic. the Holden's blinking eyes. The Interceptor's Frankenstein build goes all the way down to its smallest components. For decades, the origin of the small rectangular indicator lamps, set low into the custom Concorde nose cone, was a complete mystery to fans and builders. They clearly weren't the stock Falcon lights, but no one could place them. It was a tiny, nagging detail on a well-documented car. The truth was eventually uncovered. The lights weren't Ford parts at all. They were BFT 1000 lamps, a component sourced directly from the parts bin of Ford's arch-rival Holden. These specific indicators were designed for the EJ to EH Holden models. This is another perfect example of the build team's total disregard for brand purity. They had already used Holden Monaro spoilers and A9X flares, and to finish the car's face, they once again turned to the competition simply because those parts looked right for the evil design brief. The Interceptor isn't just a modified Ford, it's a true cross-brand mongrel, built with whatever parts from any manufacturer were needed to create its iconic, intimidating look. The fact that fans hunted for this information for years, to the point that reproduction BFT 1000 lamps are now sold specifically for replica builders, shows the depth of the car's mythology. The trucker's blower switch. One of the Interceptor's most dramatic features is the red-topped switch Max famously flips on the gear stick to engage the supercharger. It's the cinematic moment that signals all-out pursuit, the car's ultimate party trick. This piece of hardware looks like a bespoke, high-performance racing component, a custom-milled piece of battle hardware. The reality, however, is far more industrial and much less exotic. The switch is actually a common, off-the-shelf 2-speed rear-end switch, also known as a gear divider, pulled directly from a heavy-duty truck. This is a perfect case of low-budget, creative repurposing. The production team needed a prop that looked tough, tactile, and mechanical, so they sourced this standard part from a local truck wrecker or an auto parts store like Repco. This is a component a long-haul trucker would use every day to manage their differential gearing for hauling heavy loads. The film's creators took this industrial, utilitarian object and, by placing it under Max's thumb, transformed it into a legendary piece of cinematic technology. Even the specific bracket used to affix the switch to the gear lever was a standard truck wrecker part, not a custom fabricated movie prop. The ultimate weapon of the last of the V8s was, in fact, activated by a humble, mass-produced part from a diesel big rig, proving that mythology is all about context. The washing machine boost. The single most iconic action in the entire Mad Max franchise is the close-up of Max's thumb flipping that red-topped switch, engaging the supercharger. It's the cinematic moment the Interceptor unleashes its full fury, the V8 roaring as the belt spins to life. But as we've established, that weigh-in blower was a non-functional prop in the first film. This created a major technical problem for the crew. For the scene to be believable, the blower's drive belt had to look like it suddenly roared to life on command. The production team's solution is a legendary piece of low-budget, guerrilla filmmaking. The blower wasn't connected to the 351 Cleveland V8 at all. Instead, the crew had rigged up a separate electric motor under the hood, attached by a pulley to the supercharger's drive snout. When Max hit that switch on the gear stick, he wasn't feeding more fuel to the engine. He was completing an electrical circuit. And the source of this hidden motor? It was scavenged from a household washing machine. The ultimate symbol of the Interceptor's terrifying V8 power was, in reality, cinematically activated by a common home appliance. This perfectly captures the film's spirit, where the visual illusion of power was far more important and more cleverly achieved than the real thing. It's the ultimate movie magic, raw horsepower supplied by the laundry room. It's a car of bizarre contradictions. A pristine, rare white Falcon transformed into a black-on-black symbol of anarchy. A machine whose most iconic feature, that massive switchable blower, was a non-functional prop, cinematically spun to life by a household washing machine motor. This is a car that was given away as payment, failed to find a buyer twice, and was ultimately abandoned in a scrapyard for years before a fan saved it from destruction. The fact that this Frankenstein of Ford and Holden parts survived at all to become a global icon is perhaps the most Mad Max part of its entire legacy. The Interceptor's life, almost destroyed, sold for pennies, and ultimately restored with hidden marks of authenticity, mirrors the films themselves. A thrilling mix of chaos, invention, and legend. It's a car that embodies both the raw, post-apocalyptic world of Mad Max and the remarkable ingenuity of low-budget filmmaking, forever cementing its place as a cultural icon.